episode of Shake Some Dust, where this is the podcast that you can learn all about my van life adventures with my dog Penny. We live in a 19-foot mini schoolie, and we travel all over the western states, getting into adventures, meeting new people, and just trying to figure things out in life. So let's begin now, as they used to say in the old golden record books. It's been a while since I've broadcast anything, and there's a couple reasons for that. I don't get a lot of viewership or listeners or anything like that, and I've been trying to focus more on working on my book, as well as some assignments that I've had over the last few months to work on. I've had quite a bit of success lately in my magazine articles that I've been writing. I've been published 3 times in the last year in Rova magazine. The latest issue for, I believe it's April-May, has my 3rd article in that. So check it out. They sell those magazines at newsstands and mostly Barnes & Noble and Kroger stores. So that's been a great experience. I also got a bigger assignment that I've just finished, like last week. And that was for a magazine that I'll talk more about when they release. It's I just sent off my final draft to them. I haven't heard back yet for what's going on with that. But I liked how it turned out. I've been working on it since the beginning of February. It had a May 1st deadline. And I'm really excited about that. And that article is about the Continental Divide Trail. And essentially over the last several months, I think I got there in, the beginning of March. That's a whole story. I got to the southern end of the Continental Divide Trail in the beginning of March. And I left the Arizona desert on March 1st, I believe it was. And I stuck around near Lordsburg for a couple of days, and then I headed towards the Continental Divide, which is in between Silver City and Lordsburg. And as I was looking for a place to camp and set up, I was rear-ended by not one but 2 vehicles. A delivery van and like a Chevy Equinox hit them behind me. Totaled both vehicles, and my van basically had a banged-up bumper, some body damage. It messed up my water pump a little bit for my inside water, for the RV water, and rattled Penny and I, so that was not a good experience, but we were the only ones that were able to drive off, and I'm grateful that I have a bus that I travel in, because I think an RV, or even like a Sprinter van or something like that, would have been completely totaled too. So I'm just fortunate, and you could even say blessed, that I was able to drive off, and the other 2 drivers, they had to get rides into town. Both of their vehicles were just completely obliterated. So pay attention out there, folks, when you're on the road. There wasn't a lot that I could do. They were following me too closely up a hill, and bada bing, bada boom, bada crash. That's the name of that tune. Anyway, I was working on that story for a while, and it definitely has taken me to some interesting places. I'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, I am recording in the Montana wilderness, and that trip has taken me from the boot hill of New Mexico all the way up towards Glacier National Park in Montana. Anyway, if I consciously think about what I'm going to say while I'm recording, I will flub it up. So bear with me. There's going to be a lot of likes. There's going to be a lot of ums. But hopefully there's going to be a coherent story somewhere in all of this mess that you can enjoy. Anyway, the desert. That's what I wanted to talk about. This episode is about why the desert sucks. Or maybe why I really got sick of being in the desert for so long. I left Colorado at the end of September in 2024, and I was a little bit ahead of the leaves this time. Last year, it was just perfect. It was like surfing this wave of golden leaves all the way down to New Mexico. This year, I had an assignment for Rova Magazine, and it was about this event called Moon Landing 3. And it was this van life gathering that was held in the New Mexico desert near the town of Rama. I'm not sure which one it is. I've heard it pronounced both ways. But it's probably about 50 miles southwest of Grants, New Mexico, kind of by the El Malpais Badlands, El Morro National Monument, and basically it's like in this big crater area. Just really an incredible place. I got there and, I was working on the article for a couple of days. And this is for Rova, the article about Moon Landing 3. And it was just a really neat vibe. It was better. I would have to say it was a lot better than Schoolypalooza last year. And, I went into Schoolypalooza very green with this whole, kind of independent journalism shtick that I've got going on. And that was an interesting experience, but the moon landing thing was a whole completely different vibe. Schoolypalooza had a lot of crusty kids. It had a lot of like vagabond kind of like drifter folks. It was wild. They played EDM music the entire time. It was basically a party, a rave for 2 solid weeks. There was a lot of drama. People were getting into fights. People were, jockeying about, what's this about and who runs this and when it's really supposed to be. And it was very politically charged, not like it's a different kind of politics. It's not Democrats and Republicans. It was a way that kind of showed how tribalism can blow up just about anywhere in any situation. So there were people that were on the side of the registered trademark Schoolypalooza and the real Schoolypalooza and the provisional Schoolypalooza, and it was just kind of obnoxious after a while. Anyway, Moon Landing 3 was completely different because that people had to pay like $200 to get into that event. It was a lot of people in Sprinter vans. It was a lot of people in high-end kind of like land yacht buses, really nice tricked out equipment. And their vibe was a lot more laid back. It was people that I think could have been carpet crushers is what they call them. People that live in sticks and bricks. And they just chose to be out on the road. There were a lot of digital nomads. There were a lot of people that, had to work. And it had less of a homeless vibe to it, to put it in that kind of way. It was a lot of young people, like people in their late 20s, mid 30s, people that were kind of closer to my age. And Schoolypalooza was, a wide variety of people. It was like older people, a lot of people that were probably more like rubber tramps, people that would be considered crusty kids, dirty kids. And Moon Landing 3 was kind of refreshing because you didn't feel like you were in danger of getting ripped off or someone giving you like a spiked cookie or, putting something in your drink and robbing you or beating the shit out of you or anything like that. It was just a gathering of people, and they had contests and they had, raffles and all sorts of stuff. They had a free bar, and it was just kind of a neat vibe. I got to hang out there for 3 or 4 days, visited with a lot of people, and that article appeared in issue 47, I think, of Rova. So check it out if you can. They have back issues online. And I've already been paid, so I'm just kind of giving them props. But I hope people get a chance to read the words that I wrote about the event, because I hope I did it justice. It was a lot of fun. Now, that being said, to go cover that event, I kind of had to leave Colorado earlier than I did last year. So that took me down to Santa Fe for a while. And the desert has changed quite a bit in the last year even. since I've been on the road. In 2023 to 24, when I was down in Santa Fe, there were places that you could camp just outside of town in the national forest, and those places had been shut off. And a lot of that was due to the fact that people were living out there, and a lot of the time when people live out there permanently in the desert, they trash it. And it was like destroyed appliances, just a lot of garbage, a lot of destruction, and the national forest completely shut the area off. So there wasn't a lot of good areas outside of Santa Fe to camp out at this time. So, excuse me, I stayed in Santa Fe, I don't know, maybe a week. And then I headed out through Albuquerque and then made it to the event for moon landing. After moon landing, I went down to, I believe I went to Yuma. Oh, that's right. After moon landing, I cut into Grants and then through the Navajo Nation, and I traveled south to Cosmic Campground, which was a really kind of neat area. Cosmic Campground is one of these dark sky areas, and the reason they call it that is it's like a certification that you can get for an area, and it has to deal a lot with light pollution. And right about that time, the comet was coming in. You could really see the comet. You could see a lot of stars. It was just beautiful. And I was at Cosmic Campground for probably around 10 days before leaving. And then I went to Yuma after that, I believe. Oh, no, getting ahead of myself. That was the first time that I went to Silver City. And just outside of Silver City, I was camped kind of close to the Continental Divide Trail in an area called the, Walking X Ranch Road. And I'd camped there before. And I've had good luck with that place because it had a decent internet signal last year. This year, for some weird reason, it hardly had any internet signal. But I was able to get things done. And after that, I traveled to Yuma. And Yuma kind of had the same problem as Santa Fe because they'd shut off a lot of the outdoor public lands due to destruction. And so where Yuma used to have like an area, I believe it's east of the city up in the mountains, they'd shut all of that off and it was day use only. So I was not in Yuma very long. I camped north, and that was kind of creepy because I was in an area north of Yuma, kind of close to the interstate, and this place that we were camped out at, kind of by Saguaro National Park, there was a lot of garbage. There was a lot of broken glass. The weirdest thing that was there, though, was like piles of like backpacks that had just been discarded and left in the desert. So I don't know if it was a place where like the coyotes pick up or drop off people when they cross illegally into the country. It was creepy. The whole vibe was just kind of off. And a lot of the locals would drive by at night, and it was just kind of an off vibe. I went through Phoenix. I visited a friend in Phoenix for a day, and then I headed out to Quartzsite. And last year I had some decent luck in Quartzsite. I was there, I'd say about a week or two earlier than I was last year. Maybe 3 weeks earlier. And when I got there, there was a lot of sites that were closed off again. It was just kind of the same thing. It's like a lot of people have just been destroying these public lands, and then they get cordoned off, and you can't enjoy them. You can't use them. You can't park there. And you run into this situation kind of like I did in California, where if you want to park someplace, you're going to have to pay out the nose for an RV camp fee. And who has $35 a night to stay in an RV park, especially if you've got a boondocker and you don't really need to have hookups or anything like that? I mean, I don't even have hookups on my bus. It's just everything's on board. Everything is solar. And I don't need the hookups. I just need a basic level place to park. It would be nice to have internet, and it would be nice to not have garbage everywhere. So I was in Quartzsite, I think, a couple of days. I met up with a friend there that I met online, and she was also like a nomad, and she lived in a car, so like a car that was probably about the size of, I'd say, like a Nissan Altima, and she lived in that with her dog, and we camped next to each other for a couple of days, but really we did that because when I was in Quartzsite, I had my camp set up, and it used to be kind of like the law of the land, is if you have a campsite, a decent spot, you can leave some of your stuff there and people won't mess with it. You can go into town, you can come back, and then you've still got your spot reserved. I went into Quartzsite to get a couple of groceries, and everything is just either marked up or really expensive. The whole town just kind of gets on my nerves because all the prices are inflated. They know you can't go anywhere for like at least another 60 miles to get even the next Walmart. I think the nearest Kroger store is across the border in California, and even that's like a 45-minute drive one way. So I drive into Quartzsite. I go to like a Dollar General market where they've got like fruits and vegetables and groceries and things like that. I got back to camp, and I had left my shower tent and a lawn chair, like a folding lawn chair that I'd found at a camp the year before. Somebody just left. They'd abandoned the camp and just left their stuff there, and so I kind of yoinked the chair. Anyway, I got to camp. All my stuff is gone. Somebody had stolen my shower. Somebody had stolen my camp chair. And, it just kind of set my teeth on edge. And there was some, sketchy looking people that just kept driving by and kind of being aggressive, like driving aggressively. And so I knew that this friend of mine was in the area, and I was like, hey, do you want to meet up? And she was like, yeah, sure. So we met up, camped next to each other over by Kofa Wildlife Refuge, or yeah, I think that's what it's called. It's Kofa, anyway, Kofa. And we had a decent spot. It was kind of nice to hang out with somebody for a little bit, just a couple of days. And then she went on her way, and I went on mine. Probably about a week later, I stayed at the spot, and I was just done with Quartzsite. I think getting robbed really kind of pissed me off about the whole experience. You don't want to go out there and have to deal with people that have no respect for other people's things. And there seemed to be a lot more of that, especially in the Quartzsite area. So I headed to Yuma, and I camped next to the Imperial Dunes in California for a couple of weeks. And Yuma was nice because it was like a real town that people live in. They had things like libraries if you needed Wi-Fi. They had affordable groceries. They had just all sorts of different stuff like a Ross. They had Target. They had all sorts of, things that are very convenient. And it was only about 15 to 20 minutes of a drive across the California border to get into Yuma and do your shopping. The best thing about Yuma, other than the Barnes & Noble that they had there, was they had water at a couple of these reverse osmosis desalinization water pump places that they had. You could fill up your tank for 25 cents per gallon. And I think it was like you could get 5 gallons for $1. So that was the best price for purified water that I found so far. And I would go in, I would say once a week to fill up my tank, and then just kind of move around from place to place in the Imperial Dunes area, kind of by the American Girl mine. And I was in Yuma for, I would say, at least a month. And I kind of got used to it, but the drawback is that the desert is really monotonous, and it's got hostile vegetation. I mean, everything's a cactus, everything's got thorns, everything looks like it's dead. I did see a hummingbird one day that was like drinking out of the flowers that were growing out of these cholla cactuses. The people are kind of sketchy. And then there's these snowbird culture people that come down into the desert. And I think this was probably around December to January that I was in this area. And, the days are very short. I had a lot of problems with my solar not picking up enough electricity to charge up my batteries. So it was a matter of fighting my fridge and always having to monitor what my solar use was and what my electricity use was, and making sure I plugged in my devices to charge them up during the day. And as the sun got lower and lower, it was just more of a fight. It was really not a lot of fun. And the only good thing about that experience was I was looking at the news and everything else, and a lot of people were just getting shellacked by snowstorms, which I was glad to avoid. But it grated on me that I had to keep monitoring my solar, and I just couldn't get my batteries charged up enough, and I would have to shut everything down. I'd have to unplug my fridge at night, and I put in these ice packs, like those blue ice packs in the freezer section, so they would be frozen throughout the day, and then I could stick them in the refrigerator section. Otherwise, I would be losing the food that I had to pay a lot of money for that would go bad in this warm fridge. So it was just this constant battle. And I got my solar set up a little bit better, but still fighting the fridge. The amount of energy that it drew was just kind of a pain. Yuma was a lot better than Quartzsite, though. It didn't have that homeless element that Quartzsite did, or even Lake Havasu City had. I was up in Havasu for a couple of days. Really, I kind of went from Yuma to Quartzsite and then Havasu. And I loved Havasu last year. When I did the trip, I was in this canyon. It was, what was the name of it? Craggy Wash, I believe. And I was in this canyon. And then this time when I was there had been a lot of people living in this canyon for a while. And a lot of people set up these weird, like rock art stacks. And the whole vibe was just inhospitable. I couldn't get enough internet service. I kept feeling like people might come by and try to rob me. It was really a bad vibe. I moved my campsite in Lake Havasu to another area, and a guy there comes up immediately, and he starts talking to me, and he starts telling me that the government has been sending drones with microwaves that have been making his wife and dogs sick, and they've been attacking them and all this other stuff, and just starts spouting off all this paranoid crap. And so I moved about a mile, maybe half a mile away from that camp, and I just didn't enjoy it. It was just kind of like, why am I putting up with this? Meanwhile, at that point, I was getting really sick of the desert. The desert is dusty, it's arid, there's a lot of sun at times, but really there's just kind of this milky haze in the sky all the time. Yeah, granted, it's not snowing, but you just get sick of it. All the plants just are trying to hurt you. There's no green unless it's a cactus, and even the cactuses aren't looking that good in these days. They're sick. I think they're being gnawed on by like rodents and things like that. They don't talk a lot about that. I think having to do with the deserts getting hotter and colder has brought out a lot more rodents, and like the donkeys. There are tons of donkeys out in the desert too, and I think they're also gnawing on the cactus too. You get a lot of the snowbird culture people just sitting around in their lawn chairs all day, just staring out at the horizon. It's boring. It's monotonous. People that have those little side-by-sides kick dust up every time they drive by. People sitting under their sunshades all day long. And people are like, well, why don't you go hiking? Hiking is so dull in the desert. Everything is flat. So basically you're just walking on a flat land, or you're scrambling up like these razor sharp rocks. And once you get to the top of anything, there's really not much to look at. And at the time I was really fighting a foot injury that I had been working with for probably the last 2 or 3 years. I've got a really bad plantar fasciitis, and hiking was just miserable. So it was like, okay, my options are to stick around in the bus and work, or, I can, I got on kind of like a cycle of doing a siesta throughout the day when it got really hot, and then working at night. But at night, I had no electricity because I had to shut everything down. I didn't have enough light to charge up my batteries during the day. And it just kind of like started to grate on me after a while. And when you're doing things like this, you can really kind of get lost. You can lose track of time. Weeks could go by. I think I was starting to measure time in how often I had to refill my water tanks. And then it was just this logistical battle of, okay, I can drive into Yuma, I can refill my water tank. If I do that, I'm going to use up gasoline. I have to get more gas. I have to get, diesel for my heater if it gets cold at night. It was this constant struggle of using and replacing food and water and fuel over and over and over again. And it just got so monotonous, and the dust was everywhere. And it's this fine abrasive powder that literally gets into everything. The Arizona desert is a little bit less dusty than New Mexico desert. Arizona desert is surprisingly clean, but there's just nothing out there. I mean, it's just, you get bored with it so fast. And, I found one day that when I was working, I realized that my elbows were black because the dust would get on my desktop, and I would work with my elbows on the desk, not realizing that I'm picking up all the dirt and dust from the desert that is accumulated on my desktop. So the complaining, all that aside, there were some good things about being in the desert. The solitude. If you want to get away from busy cities, you want to get away from obnoxious neighbors, the desert is not a bad place to go. People kind of stick to themselves, and you just have to learn how to watch out for the people that are not going to stick to themselves. The people that are going to rob you or try to bum money off of you or come and complain about the government. You can find solitude generally if an area is crammed with people, and I use that word almost ironically. The closest that somebody else will park to you is probably around 100 yards away. And really the worst thing that they'll do is they'll be out when you don't want to see other people. It's kind of annoying. It probably speaks more about me than it does them. Another good thing is that you're spending time without spending a lot of money. So if you have a project to work on, if you have a book to work on, or articles to write, or music to make, or anything that requires a lot of intensive time without distractions, the desert is not a bad place to do it. I did a lot of photography. I spent a lot of time when I would go on a hike. I would force myself to find something interesting to take a picture of. And I would go out and I'd probably take anywhere between 30 to 50 pictures at a time. Sometimes it was just cactus. Sometimes it was lizard tracks, or like the way the light was hitting some kind of thorny bushes, or just taking pictures of Penny when she was out sniffing around at stuff. It's not cold. That's another bonus of the desert, is even at its coldest, I think I turned my heater on, I don't know, maybe a dozen times throughout the entirety of winter when I was in the desert. It doesn't get very cold. The wind is probably the worst thing. And there were days that we had windstorms that would just draw that sand right off of the Imperial Dunes, and it felt like you were being sandblasted, and it would just shake the bus. And I felt like I was at sea. You kind of find a rhythm in your life. I mentioned before about going into town to get water and food and that kind of stuff. You start to figure out a routine that is based on like, oh, on this day, I'm going to work on this. On this day, I'm going to go into town. Oh, this day is going to be laundry. And you really start to fall into a cycle after a while. And it's kind of interesting when that happens because it's a routine that becomes comfortable. And then comes the stress of, okay, well, it's time to move. And am I going to find a place that's going to have as good of Wi-Fi? Am I going to find a place that is going to be in the wind? Am I going to find somewhere that's level or trashed out or has a lot of people in the area? So that's kind of a stressor that I didn't like, but I really didn't move too far around when I was in the American Girl area. So I don't know, it was just kind of a different experience. But as the seasons went by and the days got longer again, I started to get more reliable solar power. I left Yuma and I went back north again. I stayed in Quartzsite maybe 2 days. I went back through Mesa and Phoenix, and I was there, I think, overnight. And then I went into eastern Arizona, and I was there a couple of weeks. And then I realized, okay, well, it's getting time to where I need to start working on this story. I've got a May 1st deadline, and though it seemed like, that's quite a ways off, it was the end of February, beginning of March, and I was like, all right, I need to head back towards the mountains to do this story. And from the beginning of March, when I finally got back into the Lordsburg, Silver City area, the New Mexico desert, it was dusty. It was, I had a couple of snowstorms. It was different weather. I kind of felt better, though, because there was a lot more greenery. There were like desert oaks and pine trees and junipers and piñons. And I kind of got into a different rhythm. And other than the car accident, it was kind of nice to just be someplace that it wasn't just cactus and rocks and flat land. It was a good experience. But things change. You just keep moving on with life. And I will talk more about where the road took me after that in the next episode. Hope you've had a decent experience listening to my podcast today. I got to thank my buddy Bill up in Canada. He is probably one of my few listeners, so shout out to Bill. He kind of got me inspired to make another podcast again because he actually listens to it. He said that he was on a walk the other day and listened to the last episode. And he said that I was actually interesting. So that is a big kudos for me because I don't get a lot of feedback. And a lot of the time it's just me sitting here talking to myself with my dog snoring in bed. So be careful out there on the road and, hang tight. Enjoy the next episode. Thank you for listening. Like this episode and want to hear more, or if you just want to support the channel, please visit my blog at www.shakesomedust.com, and that's shake-some, SOME-dust, DUST.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram. There are links on my blog, as well as a Substack that I've created, and you can get weekly updates. I don't spam people, and it's pretty much just a copy of my blog that goes out as a Substack. So if you want to support the channel, you want to support my efforts, I really appreciate it. Thank you, and have a great night.